Hey YouTube, today we're going to look at a great question that one of my viewers, Doug Cheesy D here, writes. How different is playing bass versus electric guitar? For some reason it seems to me that bass would be a tad easier. And so it's a really great question, and as I have spent considerable time with both instruments, I feel like I can give a pretty honest and somewhat thorough explanation as to the distinctions. And we have here a wonderful opportunity to compare because I have the same model. These are G&L, these are tributes, but I've got the Fallout guitar and then the Fallout bass, which I got for my wife. So this is her primary electric bass, and so same body style and same company and everything, but very different instruments. Look very similar, but they do very different things. And so the two main questions that this video is going to look at is, one, just directly answering that question of difficulty. Like maybe you're at the point where you're kind of thinking about both and you're not sure which one to really focus on. So, you know, difficulty and the challenges posed by playing each of these instruments, we'll compare and contrast that. And then the other thing that I want to focus on is how they function in a band dynamic, as in again, in answering that question of calling, which of these is calling to you more? Well, let's talk about what they do in the band, and that should really help you with discernment in terms of what do you feel more geared towards. And of course it can change. I used to be a bassist, and then I went into banjo and did banjo for a long time, and then came kind of full circle back to guitar and have now been focusing primarily on the guitar. So, you know, different seasons of life, you might do different instruments. And generally speaking, I believe that doing more and different instruments makes you overall a better musician because you understand music from more angles. So anyway, stay tuned. We're going to look at the differences, compare and contrast of electric guitar versus electric bass. So let's start by talking about the bass guitar. Now, a regular normal setup on a bass is going to have 4 strings. And often with basses you only have 1 pickup. Sometimes you have 2, but often you will only find 1 pickup on there. And as I understand, in terms of why do basses often only have 1 pickup and why do bassists, if they're going to, they don't usually have both pickups on, you might switch back and forth. What's the deal there? Well, one of the big challenges tonally with a bass is not producing too much sound, in the respect that the notes don't blend. They don't blend together like you generally speaking are not going to be playing chords on a bass, you're playing single notes. And the reason for that is if you play too many notes together, it just becomes overwhelming. It's this wall of sound. And you can have that problem too if you're having too much output. Right? Now obviously you can dial it all in and so forth, and you know, but bassists, then you just don't have the same tonal range that you do with a guitar. Guitars, you get a lot of distinction between the bridge and the neck, and then you might even have 3 pickups, and you know, you might have a Strat or something, 3 pickups and coil splits and all these things. You don't get a whole lot of that with bass. Now this bass is really cool. G&L does a lot of really neat stuff, and so this bass has a selector switch here in addition to the 2 knobs, and the selector switch activates 3 modes on here, either single coil, humbucker, or a built-in overdrive. So it's a really cool, I mean, G&L has excellent innovations. I love their stuff. It's the second layer of Fender. You get Fender, I call it like Fender 2.0, because it's Fender designs but taken to another level, and that's one of the things that it does. So you actually get a decent amount of distinction with this bass, but basses are not usually as focused on tone crafting in the same sense that guitarists are. Guitarists, you know, you're always like whittling this and changing that. Like basses are much more of a bass line, right? That they don't have this huge range of tones, partially because, and this is starting to hint at the second question, partially because basses function best when you feel them rather than hear them. We'll talk about that more later. But for right now, just looking at the difficulty. So what is the difficulty of playing bass? And I think generally, to answer Doug's question up front, I think it is easier to play bass in this respect. And that is that it is easier because you don't have to worry about chords. You don't have to play as many different notes as you do typically with a guitar. Generally speaking, with basses, you are playing the root note, and you're going to be doing runs off of that root note, and you'll be hitting like the root note of different chords to connect the guitarist to the rhythm. Again, we'll talk about that more later in terms of the job of the bassist, but to play a single note is a heck of a lot easier than playing a chord shape or doing lots of complex moving and so forth. And generally speaking, a song for a bass is only going to have a handful of notes in it. And again, that's for a reason, because you don't want to hear the bass, generally speaking. Generally speaking, the bass should not be jumping out at you, because if it is, then it's not doing its job, generally speaking, with some exceptions out there, right? But generally speaking, the bass, you feel it more in your chest than you do as a distinct tone. It's adding a layer of gravitas. It's depth to the sound. It's making it deeper, right? And so because of all that, it is simpler to play, considerably simpler to play. Now, you hear the way that I'm saying all these things because there's a caveat here. There's a but coming. But it is hard to play good, as in you can get those first few notes and so forth, but to really play bass, like to get into it, it is very, very difficult on this. There's two things that make bass difficult, okay? These are the things that are the greatest hurdles. One is just the amount of hand strength that you need and endurance, because it takes a lot of force to hold a note on here and play it consistently and without the death rattle of weak fingers. That's where you're not. That's the death rattle of, I can't quite hold this note. That's what happens when you start to lose it. And as a result, you will find that bass players often will fret, especially with their smaller two fingers. They'll often fret together. That adds, where you can make a longer move, but you're getting reinforcements, because it takes a lot of strength, especially since you're going to spend most of your time on your bottom two strings, generally speaking. You will do runs up and then back down, and then you're back in the root note territory, right? And so playing bass, that is where you're going to, and those are the hardest strings to play, because it has the longest reach to get around there and hit the note, and then to hold it. You see how I'm cupping my hand, right? Because even on the one, like if I was playing on a guitar, I can very easily bar. Like here, I'm making this kind of seashell shape and doing that so I can hit that, right? And hit it easily, consistently, and with strength, right? And without making my hand hurt. And so you're not having to do as much of this stuff, and you're not having to make chord shapes, but what you are having to do is hold these notes, hold them for a lot of beats, and there's often going to be a lot of, a lot of movement on your string, especially if you're playing anything like slap, where you pop in the strings and that sort of thing. You have to really have a lot of finger strength to hold it and not have that sound come out. That's your hand is getting tired, or you just can't get that note right sound on a bass. And so, picking it up and you're like, hey, this song is just this one note. Oh, it went up to the 4. Oh, the 5. Oh, back to the 1. And that's the whole song. You're like, oh, I can play bass now. Like, yeah, I mean there's not that cliff like you get with guitar. Guitar is very overwhelming. Like, oh, here's all these chord shapes and here's all these scales and stuff. And meanwhile, the bass is over there like, okay, I guess I'll play G, you know. And that's most of the song is just them going to be playing that root note, right? So it seems like, oh man, they've got like the super easy job. It's real easy. But to not just hold that note for a few notes, a few bars, a few measures, but to hold it for a whole song and not just that note, but to come up and be playing, and not just to be doing all that, but to be doing it in good timing. That's the next layer of difficulty, is that the bass, even though it is a stringed instrument, it is not focusing on melody. It is providing the core of chords. It's providing the root note of chords for the guitar to build off of and for the melody and singing to build off of. But it in of itself, it is just hitting those notes, but it is doing it in proper time. And so you have to have a good sense of timing. And developing a sense of timing is a different skill than just learning songs or learning music in the sense of, okay, I know it's this note and then it's this note and then it's this note. But this note with, oh, does it have a swing feel? And then it drops. And so you have to be like a chain listening to both the drummer and the guitarist, and that is starting to look at the second issue of how does the bass mix into the band. And that is that they are a bridge between the rhythm of the drums and the melodies, harmonies of the singing and the guitar. And so it is a bridge between them, and so they kind of have their feet in both worlds, where it is a rhythm instrument, and you've got to have a sense of rhythm. Like without that, if you're not keen on rhythm, then bass is absolutely not your instrument. Okay, you've got to have a sense of timing, a sense of rhythm. Now, obviously, everyone can improve on that. I can improve on that, and I do with practice. But you have to do rhythm practice, stuff that's focused on rhythm work. Because if you get off in the mix, again, you don't hear the bass so much as you feel the bass. And if the bass is off, it just, oh, it'll just kink your neck, and you're like, oh, there's just something it just feels wrong. In a different way, like a guitarist might flub a note in a solo or something and it squawks, but if a bassist gets off of timing and it starts to get this, it just sounds terrible. It feels terrible, right? So the two main difficulties of bass are just pure strength and endurance in your hands, that you've got to hold these notes. You have to hold them for a long time, especially you're playing live, you're playing a whole set, you're playing multiple songs up there. You've got to be able to do that consistently and not get that death rattle of, oh, my fingers are just not holding this note enough. It's very physically difficult just in a pure like strength and endurance sense. And then the other thing is the sense of timing, that it takes a lot of work to develop your sense of timing, and really be, you have got to be in the zone, connecting that drummer and the harmony melody and so forth, and weaving it together. It's the bass is almost like a glue. It like brings everybody together. It sticks everything together. It brings the rhythm into the harmony and melody, and it just adds a depth to the sound that is noticeable when it's gone. Again, you don't hear it being gone so much, but you feel like it's just not, it doesn't sound as deep. The bass offers a depth, a gravitas, a sense of emotion that is otherwise lacking without it. Now, in terms of contrasting everything we've been saying about the bass and applying it to the guitar, now, again, and these are, oh, I love G&L, and their Tribute doesn't always have the greatest quality control, but they are fantastic designs and just beautiful, beautiful. This Candy Apple Red, absolutely gorgeous. And this has got the P90 and the humbucker with the coil split. Very cool options. Awesome guitar, feels great, just wonderful. Anyway, so what are the differences? I mean, obviously there's two more strings on here, and now they are in different octaves, but they are tuned the same, as in the bass, if you're going from the lowest E, A, D, G, is the same as the guitar. The guitar adds that B and then the high E. Okay, so they're tuned very, very similarly in terms of the bass is echoing the bottom four strings. And that's one of the reasons why they resonate so well, is that they are tuned together, so they are hitting a lot of the same sounds in, they're sympathetic, you might say, right? Because they're tuned similarly. They're just like in classical orchestras, the various, violins and everything, the string section are tuned to be harmonious together, to be together. And so the bass guitar, electric guitar, they are tuned to be together. Now the strings are much, much thinner on a 6-string versus a bass guitar, of course, and that accounts for a lot of the distinction in the way that your hands develop depending on which one you're focusing on. And there are some folks out there that can seamlessly go back and forth, but generally speaking, most people develop the best when they might still play the other one, but they focus themselves on one or the other, as I have done variously. I spent years with the bass as my primary instrument, and I still played guitar some, but my development was more focused around the bass. Now, distinctions, of course, is that you can make a chord on a guitar and it sounds nice as long as you're in tune and you're playing it right, but it sounds great. You try to make multiple notes on a bass together and it's just this wall of sound, which is it's like you're being buried under the sound. So generally speaking, the bass is not designed to do chords. It is designed to do root work. It'll hit the root of the chord and then the guitar will play over that root. That is generally speaking how they go together. And if you are a bassist and you are trying to figure out how to play in a mix, like maybe you want to play for your church band and you have a bass and you're like, they don't have a bass up there. I can just about guarantee you that they would love to have you up there, because bass is great to get in the mix. And again, that intro level where you're just hitting the root notes and stuff is not that hard. As long as you've got the hand strength, as long as you work your hand strength up, it's not that difficult to break in, and to a point where you can play in front of people, play in the mix. And the difference, is that you don't have to worry about a lot of moving and a lot of different notes and stuff. If you play and you're looking at, if you've got a sheet of music, and many guitarists nowadays don't read the music, they will have just a chord sheet with the lyrics and the chords over it. The nice thing is, as a bassist, you can literally just play the notes written. If it's in C, you play some C's when you see C, and you play G's when you see G, and F's, and that's if you just play those root notes and you play it in time with the music, you play it in time, that you have done your job, and it will sound better as a result. One of the great things about bass in terms of performing is, again, it is not about the fanciness, right? And so it is better to be simple on bass. Now with guitar, now you can be simple, and don't misunderstand me here. Guitar, especially rhythm work, guitar is not just about trying to be fancy. In fact, good guitarists know that generally speaking, you are only stepping forward and being fancy in those moments of soloing. Now you can sprinkle flavor into it, and that's one of the things I really love about the guitar is how expressive it is. The notes are not just bump, 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 just the notes. You can, oh, by the way that you vibrato and bend, and the way that you attack the string, how you hold it, how you sustain it. There's so many ways to craft the sound coming out of a guitar that that's one of the reasons I believe why it is so universal now, because it can be adapted to so many different styles and tones and sounds and all these things. And that's why guitar has become the leader culturally of music, in the sense that it is instantly recognizable and it's in just about every single form of music. And I will say too that the bass is right there along with it. You know, they're like brothers and they go everywhere together. And you know, the bass, again, you don't hear it so much, but you feel it when it's not there. You feel that absence. The guitar, on the other hand, you know, is where you get into the fancy stuff. And there is fancy bass work too, don't misunderstand me, but that is generally speaking the exception, not the rule on basses. That basses, generally speaking, the role of the bass is not to be fancy or to come to the front of the mix, but to stay in the back. It's like a backbone. You know, you don't wear your backbone on your face, right? It's back there, but you need it. Your face not going to do much without your backbone back here, right? You need it, and that's the way the bass is, right? If the guitar is the face, the bass is back there, and it's the neck, right? It's the structure back there, and it just adds so much depth to the guitar. Now, in terms of the difficulty of learning guitar, it is a much steeper climb. You have more strings to deal with. These strings are smaller, and the way that your hand develops in playing guitar is different. You're much more focused on getting the tippy tip, like I talk about in my lesson, spider fingers. Well, with the bass, you have that like shell hand where you're coming around and, you know, doing a bar on a single note, basically, and you're having to like really. So it's a different development, right? You've got the spider versus the shell. Very, very different. And your calluses and your fingers and the way that your muscle memory develops is all going to be different depending on which instrument. So they might look very similar. They might have lots of the same stuff, but the way that you play them is significantly different, and as a result, your development will be different. And so the great thing is you can transition because the skills overlap, but the way that you, like right now, I'm not, I have not been practicing with bass for quite a while, so there would be a relearning curve if I were to want to pick it up and actually play in a band or something like that. But I know my muscle memory would come back. Handling it just now, I feel immediately how my hand's like, I remember how to do that. You know, it's all in there. But I'm not practiced right now on the bass. I am on the guitar. My fingers are much more used to getting into chord shapes and doing spider fingers and all that. The calluses on my fingers are primarily on the tips rather than the edge, the side right there, where it would be if you're grabbing a bass, right? So the way that you develop, the way that you, and another thing in terms of the playing difference is that basses primarily are played using fingers, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, whereas guitars, obviously there is finger picking. That's, there's all sorts of finger picking styles and so forth, but I think generally speaking, more guitarists play with a pick, whereas more bassists play with your fingers, partially because you can get multiple rhythms happening, you can get multiple layers the more fingers that you're adding in, right? You can do rolls on there and that sort of thing with a bass. You can transfer that to a guitar, but it's different. Usually finger picking is more about holding a chord and hitting this, and doing rolls and stuff. So it's still quite distinctive. So again, just in terms of the, overall between the two, right? The bass is much more difficult on a physical strength and endurance level, and timing you've got to have really solid timing. Not that guitarists can be all over the place, but that they have the benefit in a fully formed band of having the drummer and the bassist there to keep them in time. That's the idea. And so the guitarist doesn't have to focus as much on developing their sense of timing so that they can focus more on chord work and leads and arpeggios and knowing how to improvise and solo and do all that stuff, doing all the stuff that is more distinctive to the guitar. So overall, just in terms of looking at the two instruments side by side and how they compare and how they relate to one another in the mix of a band, generally speaking, as I've been saying, you want to feel the bass and hear the guitar. In a mix, the bass should craft his or her tone so that it is sympathetic with the drums and that it is filling in that rhythm and connecting it through the use of root notes and runs to then make the feeling of the guitar deeper, to add that gravitas, that depth, that emotional power that's on the low end. Between the two, you know, if you're considering which one are you interested in, maybe you've got one of each or something and you're thinking about which one do I want to really pour myself into. The question ultimately is where you want to stand in the mix. The bassist is the rock back there with the drummer. They are providing depth, they're providing consistency, they're adding an extra layer to the rhythm section, and all of that is built on principles of timing. You don't need to know fancy chord structures and all sorts of notes, and you don't need to be working all over the fretboard all the time. Generally speaking, a bassist is doing his or her job when they are providing consistent sound that you don't hear so much as you feel. You feel it makes the music hit you differently. It's got that low end. Now the guitar is the forefront. Now there is rhythm also. And so rhythm is, in a sense, kind of in between. If you're thinking solo and you're thinking bass work, a rhythm is standing between them. As a rhythm guitarist is once again focusing on rhythm, but by primarily striking chord shapes, right? By adding definition to the chord structure. And so often you find them together. You've got the bass, you've got at least one rhythm, and then you've got a lead, and sometimes you have a second lead. So depending on the band and all of that, there's often multiple parts for guitars. So there's multiple things that you can do with a guitar. Generally speaking, a bass has one job, and that is to connect the rhythm to the melody harmony. And that's their role, give those root notes. There is a lot more variety in many different regards with a guitar. You get a lot of different tones. You can obviously craft bass tone, obviously, I'm not saying otherwise, but the crafting that you do with a bass is much more limited than all of the different sounds that you get out of a guitar. And that's one of the reasons why guitarists tend to get more gear obsessed, because of all the different ways that you can build a guitar with all these different pickups and stuff. Basses are just more limited in that regard than guitars are. But you know, if you are one that wants to step forward in the mix, then guitar is really where you want to go. And so a lot of the question is where do your skills and aptitudes lie? Are you more about rhythm? Are you more about chords, rhythm work? Or are you more about leads and melody? So it's a question of discernment. Where do you want to fit into that mix ultimately? But it's not like it's a competition, as in these are brothers in arms. They work together, and a band is best when it has both of them, not just there, but really intimately working together, intertwining their sound and playing together. As always, if you've enjoyed my content, please like and subscribe, comment. Love to hear back from you guys. What are your experiences? I'd love to hear your experiences with, like, maybe you've gone back and forth between them, and is there something I didn't think about in this video? Let me know. I love to hear your comments, and thank you all for watching.